Whether you're the next Picasso or do best with stick figures, Photoshop's painting tools allow you to add artistic flourishes to any image. Let's find out how. Photoshop has some amazing capabilities when it comes to painting, and there's no better place to start exploring these options than the Brush panel. So let's go up to the Window menu and select Brush. That opens up our Brush panel. Now before we get started here, there's a few house cleaning things I want to go over. At the bottom of the Tools panel, notice that I have a blue foreground and a red background color. I want you to have these identical colors. So simply click on this foreground chip. That opens up the color picker box, and I want you to set the red, green, and blue values that I have. 49 for the red, 52 green, and 183 for the blue. Then hit OK. And I'd like for you to do the same by clicking on this background color chip. Now set 174 for the red, 32 for the green, and 17 for the blue. Hit OK. Now our brush panel at this point is completely grayed out. Why is that? Well, we don't have any of the brush tools selected. So let's go select our brush tool. Now we can see that our brush panel is ready for use, but we're not quite ready yet. Let's go and create a brand new document. Under the File menu, select New. That's Control-N on the PC, Command-N on the Mac. And I want us to start with the same size document, so change your preset here to default Photoshop size if you're not there already. And what I'd like to do is change the width here. So I want you to change that to a 10. And I'm going to hit the Tab key to cycle down to the height. And under height, I want you to enter 10 as well. So we'll both be starting with a square document. And then simply hit OK. We're going to hit the F key to cycle through to full screen mode with menu bar. I'm invoking the hand tool here with the space bar so I can drag this image out from beneath the brush panel. And now we are ready to get started. The very first thing to know about the brush panel is that in this top window we have our brush shapes. We have icons showing us the shapes of brushes available in this brush library. I want you to go down to the bottom of the brush panel, click on the Preset Manager icon. In the right flyout menu, select Reset Brushes. I want you to replace your current brushes, so press OK. I've already got my defaults, so I'm going to hit Cancel. Then hit Done. We're going to start with a simple brush. I've got my 65 brush here selected. What does that 65 mean? And you'll notice that all of the brushes have numbers. That's simply telling you the brush size. So if I click here to 19 and went here to 65, we're changing the brush size. So you can see this is a 65 pixel brush. But I can easily change that with the right or left bracket keys. I'm going to bump it up just a couple of points. Now I'm simply going to click and drag to paint. Notice that the line I painted is very soft and fuzzy. And also in the bottom of the brush panel in our brush stroke preview, you can see that same soft fuzzy brush stroke. That's because in the options bar we can pull down here, our hardness is set to 0%. That is the preset for that brush shape. We can drag this over and make it 100%. Now, if we paint, we have a hard edge. Notice that at the bottom of the brush panel, that preview updated as well. So anytime you make a change to a brush, you can preview that before you even paint, right down in that stroke preview box. So far, if you've been seeing an animated brush icon in the upper left of your document window, you've got the brush preview enabled. Your video card supports that. You can turn that off because we're not going to use it here by simply clicking on this brush preview icon. That's a nice little feature that you have if your video card supports it, but it is far from necessary and we're not going to be using that in this tutorial, so you can go ahead and turn that off. Now if you're thinking to yourself, well, brushes would be great if I could draw. Well, have no fear, Photoshop to the rescue. We've looked at a very basic brush shape. We can see some bristles here that we're going to talk about in a few moments, but if you scroll down in this shape library, you'll notice that we have some very interesting shapes. Here's a leaf. Now if I simply click, I've painted a leaf. If I click again, I've painted another one. So even if you don't know how to draw a leaf, you can draw a leaf. Watch what happens if I click and drag. Now I've got leaves stacked on top of each other. Now this is the default setting here. Now I'm going to show you the cool stuff in the brush panel. We can see here below the shape previews, we've got a size slider. That's the same as using the bracket keys. We can make the brush bigger or smaller, but I'm going to jump down here to spacing. Watch what happens in our stroke preview box if I drag the spacing slider. Look at that, it's spacing out our brush strokes. So now if I paint, my leaves are nicely spaced out. Pretty cool, huh? What else can I do? Well, we've got a flip X and flip Y checkbox. If I click on flip X, watch what happens in the stroke preview. The leaves are now flipped horizontally. If I check the flip Y box, they're now flipped vertically. You can use both of these together. You could use one or the other. You could turn them both off, obviously. So that's an interesting way that you can add some variety to your drawing. You can change the angle here of the shapes. Right now it's at 0 degrees. I'm going to click on the word angle and set this to 45 degrees. And you can see now that the brushes are tilted at a 45-degree angle. Let's set that back to 0 for now. We can change the roundness. With these leaves, they're going to look best at 100%, but I'll show you what, let's say, 30% would look like. So they're a little bit flat, almost like they're pressed on a page. Let's set this back to 100%. So we've got some very cool options here to paint with. Now we have changed our default values for this leaf brush. We've changed the spacing, we played with flipping it X and Y. The thing to remember about brush presets are, you can change them at will, but anytime you click off of this brush and select another one, when you return to that original brush, it will take its default settings. So if we go here to this other leaf brush, which is very nice. Actually, let's paint with that a little bit. There we go. If we move back to our original leaf, now our spacing is set back to 25, and any other changes we would have made here have been lost. So if you would like to make changes to a brush shape and maintain those changes, here's what you do. Let's change the spacing here. Put it something like there. Let's flip this, and let's put the angle at 15 degrees, for example. Now what we'd like to do, if we want to be able to go back to this brush preset, go up to the flyout menu at the top of the brush panel and select New Brush Preset. It gives us a default name. Scattered Maple Leaves is the original name, and it's adding a 1, so it won't overwrite that. Notice that we have Capture Brush Size in Preset. Right now it's at 74, so if we check that box, our new brush preset will be 74 pixels. We can simply hit OK. And now let's move to a different brush. Let's go to this sort of 3-leaf guy here. Now if we go back to our original brush, well, there's the default settings, but we have our new brush preset down here that maintains the characteristics we just put in. Now I'd like to talk to you a bit about bristle tips. All of these standard brush shapes have what's called static tips. But if we click on one of these bristle tip brushes with the very cool icons here, you'll notice that our menu options change below. We have a bristle qualities box. We can change the shape of it. This is a round point. We could do something like a round curve, for example, and notice here in this preview box what that does. We can change the amount of bristles. We can increase them. We can decrease them. We can change the length of the bristles. We can change thickness. Now if you make it very thick, you're sort of taking out all of the individual bristles there. We could change the stiffness of it, for example, and we can change the angle. And of course our old friend spacing. So all of these parameters we can change for any of these bristle brushes. So if we click on this fan brush here, we can see how this paints. Let's click and draw with that. But if we change the bristle amount here, let's reduce those, make them a bit less stiff, and change the angle. Now we have a slightly different stroke. So all of those things that you can play with your brush bristles. Well, enough of that tinkering around the edges. We're going to create a brand new brush from scratch. Now you can create a brush out of anything. You can even create it out of another image, and that's what we're going to do. So I want you to go to your Chapter 14 folder and open up the file Strawberry 2. And let's drag this so we can see the whole object. Now what we want is for this entire strawberry to become a brush shape. To do that, we first select it, So let's use our quick select tool. W is the keyboard shortcut. Now we want to select the strawberry, but as we saw in an earlier chapter, sometimes it's easier to select the area that you do not want. So we're going to bump up this brush size, and I'm going to paint over this background. Fill in a little bit here, and once more there. And that's pretty good. We've got a rough selection, and that's going to be just fine for our purposes. Keep in mind, though, that we have selected the background, and we want to invert that selection. So we go up to the Select menu and choose Inverse. Now our strawberry is selected. And with that selection made, go to the Edit menu, and all the way down here, select Define Brush Preset. This is where we create our brand new brush. The brush has a nice icon. It's got a default name. I think this would be much better served with strawberry. So let's simply click OK. And now let's go back to the document we created. When you've got multiple documents and the view is blocked, simply go up to the Window menu. Scroll all the way down here to the bottom, and we can select Untitled 1. And let's go back and choose the brush tool. Now, in our brush panel, let's scroll down and find our strawberry. There it is. So if we click this, we now can paint a strawberry. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush just a bit. There is a strawberry. If I click and drag, multiple strawberries stacked on top. So let's change the spacing here. Space those out like that, and let's flip them that way, and now let's paint. There we go. So we've got strawberries. We can paint those all day. Note to this point we've only been painting in blue. When you paint with the brush uses the foreground color. If we wanted to paint a red strawberry, which I think makes a bit more sense, let's simply go and toggle our foreground and background colors here. Now let's paint another strawberry. And there we go. Now we've got some red going in there. Now we can do a lot with the brush presets panel, and we're not finished with it. We're going to come back to it in the next lesson. But this takes up a lot of screen space. And if you're not looking to alter any settings of your brushes, you really don't need to have this taking up that much of the screen. So what we're going to do now is dock this beneath our history panel, free up some screen space here, and instead what we're going to open under Window is Brush Presets. Now we've got a listing of all of our presets in a much more compact, manageable space. We can scroll up, choose any of them that we want, and we've freed up a lot more room for our image. So when you're going to actually make changes to the brush, go to the brush panel, but when you just want to quickly and easily select from the presets you've already made, you can use the brush presets instead. Now we haven't saved this file, and if we simply try to close it by going File, Close, Photoshop is going to remind us that, hey, we have not saved this. And in this case, for the very first time in our training, we are going to save this document. So I want you to select Yes. And let's give this a name. Let's call this DoodlePad. We're going to use this file in our very next lesson. For right now, we can leave it as a PSD file. We could save it as a TIFF as well. Save it back to your Chapter 14 folder if you prefer, and simply click the Save button. The strawberry we don't need to save, so you can simply close that, and I'll see you in the next lesson. We just saw some of the amazing options we have with brush shapes and bristle tips, but now we're going to take things up a notch with a quick look at brush dynamics. I've got open on my screen the DoodlePad document that we saved in the last lesson. If yours is not on screen, you can find it in your Chapter 14 folder. If you did not create a DoodlePad, have no fear, because the first thing we're going to do here is clear out the contents. So let's go to the Select menu, select All, then the Edit menu, Fill, and we're going to choose white. We want to fill this canvas with white and get rid of our previous doodles. I'm going to deselect these marching ants with Control D on the PC. That would be Command D on the Mac. You can see that I've still got my strawberry custom brush selected, and let's move to the brush panel. Now beneath brush tip shape, we've got a list of what's known as brush dynamics, and these are very cool. Let's start with shape dynamics. make sure to click on the word, and then you can see all the options to the right. Now we've got options for size, angle, roundness, and we have a flip X and Y. Those terms are all familiar. We saw them in our brush shapes options, but now they're all followed by the word jitter. Jitter is simply a geeky word for randomness. So watch down in our stroke preview box. If I drag the size jitter slider over to the right, I'm randomizing the sizes of these strawberries so they're not one uniform size. I can make this same adjustment for the angle. Some random angles there. We can adjust roundness. And I could even flip them horizontally, but that's applied randomly. So let's take a look at what that stroke would look like. And there we go. Lots of variety there. Let's go down to scattering. This is also a very cool one. Right now, all of our strawberries are floating along a curve, but if I drag the scatter slider, you can see now they're spaced apart and kind of floating in space. But they're all scattering or moving in the vertical axis. If I check this box, both axes, well, now they're scattered horizontally and vertically. We can increase the count, add to the density of these strawberries here, and of course we could randomize that density. Now if I paint, look at that, completely random assortment of strawberries. Now here's another great thing about dynamics. Remember in the last lesson when we clicked a brush preset and made changes, if we moved off of that preset and came back to it, our changes were wiped out. Here we've got padlocks to the right of all of these dynamics. If we click on them to lock them, then move to another brush preset, those two parameters, in this case shape dynamics and scattering, will remain. Let's see how that works. Let's go to our brush shapes. And let's go and select a very standard brush here, the plain old vanilla 19 hard edge brush. You can see that even though the preset changed, it is picking up our shape dynamics and scattering. Let's change one thing here to this brush before we get started. We're going to open up the spacing here. Now what happens if you don't want to maintain the shape dynamics and the scattering in this case? Well, they're both locked, but we can simply go to the flyout menu here and check Reset All Locked Settings. So that takes the shape dynamics and scattering to their defaults. Let's increase spacing a bit more here. And the final dynamic that's very, very cool I want to show you is color dynamics. Now we've got our first option that will let us shift between the foreground and background color. So I'll drag the slider here to increase the randomness. And I'll paint here. I'll increase the brush just a bit. And you can see it's varying back and forth. That's a nice little tool, but here's where it really gets fun. I'm going to drag the hue over here. Now when we paint, we have a full spectrum of colors. We're not limited to the foreground and background colors. We could adjust the saturation of those, but here's the one that's really fun. We can adjust the brightness. I'm going to drag this pretty far to the right. And now let's see the result. There we go. We've got an even greater range of colors here. The purity slider is an adjustment for your saturation. It sets the endpoints. I'm going to leave this set at 0. But look at the amazing changes we can make with dynamics, even on a plain old vanilla brush. New to CS5 is the Mixer brush, offering for the first time a way to simulate what happens in real life when you brush onto a wet canvas. To explore this, let's open up a file in our Chapter 14 folder. Open the file Mixer. Notice that I have my Brush Presets panel up on screen. If yours is not open, go to Window and select Brush Presets. Now let's select the Mixer Brush tool. It is located in the Tools panel beneath the Brush tool. So click on Brush and let's select Mixer Brush. Now a couple things here I need to talk about in the options bar. The very first thing we have is a color swatch, and this is called the reservoir. This is the color that you are dipping your paintbrush into. By default, it's set to the foreground color, but we'll take a look at how to change that. To the right, you have two brush icons. This first one, you can toggle it on and off. This is your load icon, and when it's activated, you will be loading your brush between every stroke. In other words, you'll be dipping your brush back into that reservoir of color. To the right of it, we have the clean icon. You can toggle this on and off also. When this is activated, your brush will be clean between each stroke. So 2 consecutive strokes will have the exact same mix of colors. We've got a pull-down menu here with a ton of handy presets that we'll get into in a moment. But let's talk about this first parameter here, the wet value. The wet value determines how wet or dry your canvas is. So let's set this to a value of 0. We're going to have a completely dry canvas. We're going to have a load of 100%. Load refers to how much color you're putting onto your brush. So right now we're going to brush on this yellow square with a red paint. Click and drag, and we simply have the normal brush behavior in Photoshop. No big deal. But if we change our wetness to 100%, let's see what happens. Now we'll start painting in this yellow. And now look at what we have. The colors are mixing together because the canvas is wet. Now let's talk about load for 1 second. I'm going to set a wetness of 0 again. And this time for the load, I'm going to set it to a very small value, like 3%. Now let's click and see what happens. If I click here and drag, I'll do it again because you may have missed it. Look at that. I keep dragging the mouse, but the paint runs out because we have a very small load. We did not put a lot of paint on that brush. Next, we have the mix option. Now this is only active when you have a wetness value above 0. So let's set a wetness here of 100. Going to set a medium strength load of 50%. And I'm going to set the mix at 0. When the mix is at 0%, Photoshop is giving ultimate priority to the reservoir color, in this case to the red here. So if I paint on this brown, you can see the red shows up right away, and if I stretch out of that, we're painting with all red. Now let's see what happens if I change the mix to 90%. As the mix increases in percentage, Photoshop gives more weight to the pickup color, the color that is on the canvas. So now if I paint, well, you can see now there's a bunch of brown because you can't even see any red. If I spill out, look at how much of that brown color we're picking up. So mix is a great way to vary the percentage between your reservoir color and the canvas color. Now if we're going to be painting with this reservoir color, how can we change it? Well, you could go and change your foreground color as usual. You could simply click on it and select a new value, but you can also pick up color directly from the canvas. And you do this by positioning the mouse over a color, holding down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, and simply click. We can add the yellow here. We could go back to red. Simply Option, Alt, clicking selects the canvas color as your reservoir color. Now there's one very important option under here. Until now I've been using the Load Solid Colors Only option, but I'll turn this off so you can see what it does. And I'll increase the brush size a bit too. If I put the brush over this area and Option click on the Mac, Alt click on the PC, notice what my reservoir color looks like. It is picking up all the color sampled by the size of my brush. So I'd be painting with yellow mixed with red up at the top. If you don't want that behavior, simply turn this back on, select Load Solid Colors Only. Now if I Option Alt click in that same location, I have a solid patch of yellow. So far we've just been making squiggles, but I'll show you a quick application of this tool. Let's open up a file in our Chapter 14 folder, and this time we'll choose Guanajuato 2. Alright, I'll zoom in here at 100% view. We'll go up to the top. What we want to do here to this illustration is add a little sun to it. Now I'm going to go down and choose a more artsy kind of brush for this one. I think I'll choose something like this. And I'll increase the brush size just a bit. And now I'm going to use our preset list. I want to have a very wet brush, so I'm going to choose Very Wet. This gives me a wet value of 100, a load of 50%, and a mix of 50%. I'm not going to paint directly on the background layer. It's always, always, always a good idea to paint on a layer. That way you can always undo your changes in the future. So in the Layers panel, let's click the Add Layer button. And we're going to paint on layer 1, but we want this mixer brush to interact with the background layer. So we're going to turn on Sample All Layers. And now we'll make a little sun. Not too bad. You can see the colors mixing because of the wet canvas, so we at least have a little more natural painterly-like look. But suppose we think that sun came in just a bit too bright to match the rest of the image. Well, here's what painters would do. Van Gogh and Monet would do a wet into wet painting, and that is exactly what we are going to do. I'm going to click on our reservoir color. That brings up the color picker, and I'm going to choose a yellow that is just less bright, something down about here, and I'll select OK. Now what I want to do is paint over that brighter yellow with the darker yellow and let those colors mix nicely. So what I'm going to do is lower my wet value because I want this to be fairly subtle. I'll set that to 30%. My load is going to be very small. I don't want to overpower the existing yellow. I'll set that to 5%. And I'm going to set my mix fairly high at 85. This will weight this heavily towards the canvas color. And now I'm going to just gently paint over this. And so what I'm doing here is just getting a nice darker shade of yellow by painting on a wet canvas. I'll open up the history panel and you can see the before and after. Here's with our first bright yellow, and now we've toned it down a bit. So the mixer brush is a brand new addition to CS5, and if painting is your thing, you're going to want to spend a lot of time with this tool.